Good of you to join us. Welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. South Korea boasts the world's third largest virtual asset trading volume, trailing only the United States and Japan. But compared to the massive market size, regulations have lagged, leaving gaps in monitoring illegal activities and safeguarding users. To establish a secure framework in the rapidly expanding virtual asset markets, the Virtual Asset User Protection Law, Korea's first specialized cryptocurrency legislation, will take effect starting tomorrow. Meanwhile, controversies surrounding next year's minimum wage and wage-setting procedures continue, frustrating both businesses and workers alike. For an in-depth analysis of the new cryptocurrency law and the lingering debates over the legal base wage, Yang Jun-sok, economics professor at the Catholic University of Korea, joins me in the studio. Thank you for coming in today.
Happy to be here.
And also with us tonight is Song Soo-young, professor at Chung-Ang University's College of Business and Economics. It's great to have you back.
Thank you, and glad to join you.
All right, Professor Song, let's start with you. So from tomorrow, the Virtual Asset User Protection Law will come into effect. Let's first talk about what exactly the new law is.
Actually, this is about the protection for the users, particularly make an investment and make use of some digital tokens or some the digitalized assets. However, the problem is digital assets could have some diverse features that are mixed up and then laid in the asset. Even though we call it asset, actually it is but just only exists in virtual form, so we cannot touch it. But however, it could be used as some kind of commodity, and it works as a commodity, such as like some good to be used for some other purpose. And also it could be used as a security. Therefore, because of that, many of the countries around the world, including US, has some difficulties to how to differentiate those two aspects and who is responsible for the regulation and the supervising over the assets. Right now in Korea, we have just under the name of the virtual assets, and the currently FSC tried to handle these issues in some under circumspect, and then to help the users to have some very safe and some innovating trading in the virtual assets.
The key provisions of the new law, so they specify how the virtual asset market will be supervised and illegal activities will be investigated to ensure greater protection for users. Professor Yang, the next big question then is what constitutes virtual assets, the scope of virtual assets that will be regulated under the new law. The financial authorities, they announced a set of guidelines last month, but there still seems to be a bit of confusion.
Well, that's because partially the field is rapidly changing and there's continually new types of assets being introduced. So the U.S. Federal Reserve or European Union has made a definition, but it's not very helpful. The definition is an electronic representation of value, whatever that means. The Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, which is an intergovernmental group which sets international standards to prevent money laundering and terrorist activities. They define virtual asset as any digital representation of value that can be digitally traded, transferred, or used for payment, which is slightly better, but again, we don't know exactly what they mean. The Korea Financial Services Commission, their definition is virtual asset is an electronic token asset which is issued in large volume and can be directly or indirectly used as payment for specific services. But because all these definitions are so broad or non-specific, they've asked the Korean fintech industry association to give examples, and they're going to use the examples to sort of show what the guideline means in this case. So the industry association is gathering various different types of assets and presenting it to the FSC. They're determining whether this constitutes a virtual asset or not. But what I am worried about, though, is that Korean law tends to be literal. So if the guideline includes these assets, they will be counted as virtual asset. But if new kind of virtual assets come along, and if FSC does not continually update the type of goods that are considered as virtual asset, then it might fall behind the times because that's how Korean law and regulation works. It's very literal.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like we still need a clear criteria of needed to determine whether certain assets, especially the confusing ones like the NFT, the non-fungible tokens, they fall under the category of virtual assets or not. And I think you highlighted a really important point that the FSS, they need to keep upgrading the incoming new coins and the new types of virtual assets as well. It sounds like a daunting task. Now, Professor Song, with the introduction of the User Protection Act, crypto exchanges will be required to set up their own monitoring bodies and review the legitimacy of their coins on a quarterly basis. They'll be assessed on standards such as the credibility of coin issuer and user protection measures. Tell us more about this, and does this imply that certain coins might face delisting?
Yeah. As you mentioned, this is very important because in Korea, in South Korea, the reason why the FSC directly supervise these virtual assets, and Professor Yang mentioned that they lack the flexibility for their upcoming or newly invented virtual assets. However, what is important right now is, for example, the virtual assets, the participants who would like to use of these digital virtual assets, then they have to invest their money. Those money should be protected because that is stored in the bank, commercial bank. That's why these FSC needs to play a role. But in other countries, such as the U.S. and in Europe, has a little bit different approach. Because in the U.S., the so-called Financial Innovation and Technology 21st Century, which is abbreviated as a FIT21, it has mentioned that the criteria whether these virtual or digital assets should be treated as a security or commodity. As long as it turns out to be a commodity, that should be supervised under the regulation of CFTC. And then, on the other hand, if it is securities, and then if it is identified as securities, those should be controlled and regulated under the name of the SEC. That is a very clear distinction. Therefore, that is kind of some benchmark guideline for our South Korean FSC could adopt to determine what kind of the virtual assets should be treated. But however, the FSC could deal with these issues simultaneously. Therefore, I don't think even though it sounds like it lacks flexibility, but still the FSC could deal with these issues. On the other hand, in the MiCA, which is markets in the crypto assets in the European Union, is because European unions are consisted with so many different countries. Therefore, this could be they need some agreement and consensus among the member countries to determine how to regulate effectively. Even though they start very early in the June 2023, they could make some progress. But whereas in the U.S., they are stalled even though they passed the House bipartisan agreement. But the problem is still they need to address the issues how to collaborate or coordinate between those two supervising or regulatory agencies. So that's why the Biden administration and their cabinet right now is a little bit object the act of FIT 21 to be enforced just right away. They need to wait for the Senate to agree with that. And then what is but important is the non-fungible token. For example, it is a non-fungible token could be counted as some kind of securities, whereas non-fungible token should be regarded as a kind of commodity. So that is one example of distinction between those two parts. So that could be easily used in this for South Korea FSC.
And going back to the self-monitoring by cryptocurrency exchanges that'll be implemented in line with the new law, boosting monitoring on unfair practices, unfair tradings, like price manipulation, of course, will help protect users. But there are also investor concerns about a massive delisting of the so-called kimchi coins, those listed only on domestic exchanges. So we'll soon find out what will happen. Professor Yang, Korea's first implementation of the cryptocurrency law is also shedding light on how other advanced economies are protecting their virtual asset users. Now, Professor Song briefly touched upon this, but could you give us some representative examples we should take note of?
Well, as Professor Song mentioned, the leading regulation in this area was passed by EU, and it's the MiCA, Markets and Crypto Assets Regulations. It went into effect in May, and according to EU, the goal of the MiCA framework is to inform prospective customers and holders of crypto assets about the characteristics, functions, and risks of crypto assets that they intend to purchase. It includes measures to guarantee market integrity, reduce risks of fraud, reduce market manipulation, and it does that by differentiating asset reference tokens, electronic money tokens, and other tokens. We mentioned the NFT, non-fungible tokens, a bit before. Interesting thing about MiCA is that it excludes most NFTs because they represent something that is supposedly unique rather than something that is used like currency, a whole bunch of, say, money bills going around or equivalent to money bills. NFTs are, say, artwork, so that those are something that's unique, so that is not counted as a virtual asset, at least not virtual monetary asset. Now, United States, as Professor Song mentioned, has the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century, or FIT bill, and FIT bill includes conditions to distinguish whether a virtual asset will be considered a security or a commodity, and the virtual asset community was very happy that at least some of the virtual assets, ones that are classified as commodities, would be regulated by the not by the Securities and Exchange Commission, but the Commodity Future Trading Commission, because they tend to be looser than the SEC. So the virtual asset community was saying that in order to guarantee more innovation, you need looser regulation, and they got that with the Commodity Future Trading Commission. United Kingdom and Singapore also have initiatives concerning trading in virtual assets, but some countries like Switzerland, they're not putting in any regulations at all. They're just saying that just let it go, see what it develops.
That's interesting. Now, shifting gears to next year's minimum wage, Professor Song, after months of intense tug of war, next year's hourly wage has been set at 10,031. Surpassing the 10,000 threshold for the first time. And this will raise various welfare subsidies, such as unemployment and maternity benefits as well. Help us get a clear grasp of expected changes in subsidies linked to the minimum wage.
Da-eun, I'm sorry, I would like to add up a little bit about some previous issues. particularly for example, the initial coin offering occurs. Initial coin offering itself could be treated as a security. And then the coin or some kind of token which was issued, that was just treated as a commodity. That is a clear distinction which the U.S. government would like to try to address and how to regulate effectively for their commodities. And Professor Yang has mentioned a little bit, but I would like to add more. And let me turn to some minimum wage issues. Then, currently, recently, we have just observed that from the 10,000 Korean won to 10,171, just only 1.7% increase. Considering the inflation that has prevailed for the past 2 or 3 years, this is actually the reduction of a real income. So I look into the real minimum wage in terms of purchase power parity, not just the exchange rate, because a different country has a different inflation level and also different consumption expenditure. That should be taken into account the effect of minimum wage. Considering that South Korea has remained relatively stable and a little bit reduction in real income, real minimum wage level. For the other countries, even though nominal minimum wage level has been increased a lot but however, they have suffered so much from the high level of inflation. To that regard, because our economy has suffered from some decreasing GDP growth rate, actually, which was in last year we were just lower than our GDP growth rate was lower than even Japan. As a result, that caused our real minimum wage looks very stable or a slight reduction. But the other countries, in order to promote the economic growth, GDP growth rate, they would like to increase the minimum wage nominally, but real wage has been decreased a little bit. And for Japan has a very different perspective because the Japanese government would like to incur the inflation rate because they don't have to worry about inflation rate because inflation was too low for the past 20 years. That's why the Abenomics has worked quite well in light of the recovery of the Japanese economies. Therefore, I would like to suggest that the government should think of, and the employers and some manufacturing firms and all other firms should think of minimum wage is not just expenditure. That is a way to promote some consumption power to help the economy to grow. So to that regard, the minimum wage is the minimum level to support the consumers' purchasing power. That is clearly beneficial to the industry and the manufacturing firms and the economy. Therefore, some people, even though they complain of the increment of a minimum wage, but minimum wage is really, as long as minimum wage is increased, it is much better for the economy, particularly in this kind of our size of economy and our territory is relatively very concentrated. In this economy, we need that. Do not compare the South Korean economy with China or United States because they have a far different landscape and economic picture in hand. Therefore, we should say that the minimum wage is a very necessary minimum level to promote the economic growth.
A very strong assertion there from our Professor Song that raising minimum wage is helpful to boosting domestic economy. Now, Professor Yang, applying different base wages by industries has also long been a point of contention, but no agreement was made on that. Right. Now, some economists argue that it's about time for South Korea to introduce industry-specific wage system to offer greater flexibility. What's your take?
Okay, the reason for that, and I'm going to disagree with Professor Song a little bit, is that Korea, if you look at Korean minimum wage in the long run, it has risen very quickly. From 2013 to 2023, it rose by 110%, while the regular wages only rose by about 40%. And compared not to China but to other OECD countries, last year Korea was if you earned minimum wage as a full-time job, then you earned about 63% of per capita GDP, which was the second highest in the OECD. This year, we're about 6. Some Eastern European countries have raised their minimum wage, but I think in those countries, it is very hard to get a full-time job at a minimum wage, unlike Korea, which does. So I think unlike Professor Song, maybe I think Korean minimum wage may be set a bit too high so far. But having said that, some of the countries which we admire, like Sweden do not have a nationally set minimum wage. They have a minimum wage set by industry negotiation between labor and the union, so they naturally come up with different minimum wage for different industries, but Korea does not work that way. I think one of the problems is that the Korea representatives who decide the minimum wage represent not only the minimum wage workers and businesses which pay minimum wage, but the national unions and national business groups, and the minimum wage negotiations tend to be the first step in national wage negotiations, and that, I think, puts the minimum wage workers and unemployed at a disadvantage. So I think that is one of the problems that we have with the minimum wage system. But I think perhaps the industry-specific minimum wage may not work because, well, workers will naturally gravitate toward higher-paying industries. So lower-paying industries you may not be able to find workers who are willing to work at a lower minimum wage. But I think, like some areas of the United States, area-specific minimum wage may make sense. If you're living in an area which has very high cost of living like Seoul, you may need higher minimum wage. But if you're living on a countryside where the cost of living is not so much, then lower minimum wage may promote more job creation.
It sounds like some advanced countries, they offer greater flexibility in the rate-setting procedures, so we can perhaps learn from that. But right now, at least for the time being, industry-specific wage system would not work well for Korea, is what you're saying. And we'll have to conclude our discussion there due to time restraint. Thank you so much, as always, Professor Yang, for joining us.
Thank you.
And many thanks to you as well, Professor Song, for sharing your insights.
Oh, I'm sorry I couldn't make some argument against Professor Yang's
Perhaps next time. We'll invite you very soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.